Welcome back, boys and girls. We are continuing our Megasquirt series, and we're going to get the firmware loaded today and go through all the parameters needed to do the first start. So we're going to start with, over here on the TrueBoKitty site, we've got some firmware that we need to download. So what I recommend doing is getting yourself a little folder. I called it tuning, and I can download all this stuff and you can unzip it and whatnot. So there are later versions of the firmware, but the base map that Brainiac has provided is for this particular firmware. So there's some auto updates that the tuning software can do, but for your first time it might be just for the best to take out any unknowns out of the situation by downloading this particular firmware release, which is fine. There's no real major issues. And then the base map that he provides. That way you don't have to worry about any kind of incompatibilities. So we're going to download that. We download the base map. And what this is going to be is an MSQ file. So here I've downloaded the 94 through 97 MSQ. I've stuck that in there. And we've got our firmware. And so that's here. So when you unzip this, you're going to see a couple different things. MS3, S19, this is the actual firmware file. Then you're going to see some executable files for your particular OS. So I'm assuming you're on Windows, most common, and you're going to be running this MS Loader 32. And what this is going to do is connect or detect your Megasquirt when you plug it into your USB, and then you'll tell it which file to load, and then that's going to burn the firmware to the Megasquirt. So if everything is good with the Megasquirt, then this process will be relatively straightforward. Okay, before we go too much further, a quick word about where you want to put all this. So this should go onto a laptop because you're going to be taking, this is now your tuning device. So you're going to be taking this out to the car, so it needs to be a portable device. Now, if you have any laptop that's been made in the past decade or so, it's going to be fine. It really doesn't require very much space for this, and it doesn't require much horsepower. You don't need a big CPU, you don't need the latest stuff. Basically, you just want a device that you can take out to the car that's not going to overheat, that has a decent battery, so that you can drive around with it and stuff like that for a while without having any problems. And so there's a lot of, if you don't have one that meets this criteria, there are a lot of cheap laptops that are available out there today on Amazon. You can definitely get in the $200 range, and those laptops will work fine for this application. So it doesn't have to be a $1,000 laptop or anything like that. So you can also pick up a used one off of eBay, and that works just as well too. So but anyway, you do want portability. So my particular laptop is a decent i5 with a 15.7 inch screen. That's about the biggest screen I would recommend, just because it becomes unwieldy in the car if you get much bigger than 15.7. So a 14 inch screen, 12 inch, even 10 inch type of thing is fine. The main thing is that with a little bit larger screen, you can see the gauges and all that stuff out of the corner of your eye in the main Tuner Studio view. So that's the only thing to keep in mind. But like I said, pretty much any laptop is going to work. All right, so the second thing you're going to be downloading is, so we haven't actually loaded anything. We're just getting our PC and laptop prepped. So we want to head over to EFI Analytics and tunerstudio.com, where you can go to the download page, and you can get a free version of this. There's an evaluation version as well. But I recommend just going ahead and just buy the best package. And what I mean by package is you can get Tuner Studio with the Megalog viewer. They have different levels, like Ultimate or something like that. And I think it's like 120 or something along those lines. So I would do that. you've just saved yourself about $600 by building this Megasquirt yourself, so you can afford to now get the kind of upgraded Tuner Studio. So Tuner Studio is going to be your software of interacting with the Megasquirt, and the upgraded version, the paid version, allows you to do real-time auto tuning. So I'm not talking T-Pain, but what I'm talking is you're going to be able to tune your AFR maps and your fueling maps, I should say, based on your AFR targets while you drive. So basically it tunes it for you while you drive. So you can do a lot of stuff just on the street just by driving around at a normal pace. You can do a lot of cruising tuning, idle tuning, a bunch of stuff you can do can be done with the auto tuning and auto analyze features. So we're now back out at the car, and before you even turn the key on, you're going to want to do one thing, because in our case, if you followed this guide, we have not loaded the firmware yet outside of the car. So the Megasquirt is plugged in right now, but there's no firmware on it. Now, what can happen, and this is somewhat a rare occasion, I think, with the MS3Xs, but it's still worth your while to fix, is when there's no firmware on the device and you turn on the key, then it's possible to put the coils into a indeterminate state. It may drive the coils to a high state that can damage them. So what you want to do, if you have no firmware, or if you're about to upgrade the firmware on the Megasquirt, then you're going to want to unplug the coil packs. And so you just go right to the back there and just pop them off there in the back. And that works for basically all the years of cars. On some of the cars, there's a sub harness for your injectors and your coil packs into that plug. Might be a little bit more accessible. I think it's a 6-pin. It's that 6-pin one right there. And that might be a little bit more straightforward, but just to be safe, if you pop it off at the coil pack, then you know the coils are isolated. So definitely do that before loading the firmware. Once you've loaded the firmware, you put those back on, and you'll be good to go. All right, so I'm out here at the car, and I've got my key in the ignition, but it's off, and my USB cable's ready to go, but it's not plugged in yet. So what I'm going to do is put it to the key on position, obviously not start it, but just the ACC type position, the first turn. So I'll do that. And because I actually have firmware loaded already, I hear the fuel pump running, so that's good. That's what you're supposed to hear. And so I'm going to plug in my USB port. And at this point, it's going to pop up something that says it's installing drivers. And I can confirm that everything is correct by going over here and searching for the device manager. And what we're going to do is look for the ports. So you come down here to ports, and you'll see that it placed that a USB port has been plugged in. And in this case, it put mine on COM3. So it may put it on COM1 or COM2 or whatever. COM3, I think, is common. So we'll take a look at that. It really doesn't matter which one it is, but you just want to remember what it did. We can look at the properties. And we'll go up here to port settings. Okay, so the first thing actually we want to do is change this to a higher speed, because our Megasquirt can deal with much more. So we'll change it to 115,200 bits per second. Then we'll go to advanced. And then we want to make sure the latency timer is set to 1. Then we can say OK. And OK. And what that does is, that's actually technically not necessary to do that, but if you don't change the speed of the port, you'll be at the default rate, and it will take about 5 minutes to load the firmware, when in actuality it really should only take about 5 seconds or something like that to load the firmware. So that's really the only difference of why we're coming in here. So once we've got that set up, we can go back and we can actually open up a command window. So I just type CMD in the search. It's going to pop this up. I'm going to go to my tuning directory, and I unzipped to the MS3 folder, and we'll look at what's in there. And you'll see that the MS loader files are there, so we'll bring up that. We'll tab through. Okay, so we got to Win32, and so they give you a warning: remove the fuse powering your ignition coils. We unplugged it already, so those are all unplugged. And it also says, make sure that your Megasquirt is powered up. Ensure that nothing's running. And you can select normal is number 1. And then it's going to scan for the port. And in this case, I actually didn't close Tuner Studio. So this is what it looks like when Tuner Studio is connected. But you would close that, and it would scan and find it on COM 3. If it finds another COM port that's not what you found before when you plugged in the USB, then something's wrong, and you just need to correct that. And then it will go, and you can select your S19 file, and it will load it. Now, in my case, I've already done all that, so I'm just going to close out of this. So now the firmware should be loaded, and if you're having problems at that point with communication to the Megasquirt, then you may have sort of a deeper issue. It's kind of out of scope of the video. Some things to check is just to verify, in the Megasquirt, all your connectivity, make sure it has power, make sure your cables are seated correctly, make sure that the USB port settings are correct, all that kind of stuff, and you should be able to start communicating with it. So now we've installed, I didn't go through the install process for Tuner Studio, but it's basic Windows install. We're going to open this up. And the first thing you're going to do in Tuner Studio is set up a project. And basically this will be sort of empty, and you'll say create new project. And you can give it a name. And if you're already connected and you've plugged in with key on, it can scan your devices and it will find your Megasquirt. So it found the MS3 1.41 is the firmware we loaded, and so it's all set. Okay, so once we've selected a controller, it will ask you what you want to have as the basic setup for your project, and we want to set this for wideband. You'll want to set it for Fahrenheit or Celsius. The rest of the stuff, the default, is probably correct. And we already tested it, so it says successful. This is the default dashboard, so you can pick different ones, but let's just keep it with that, which has a lot of useful items. So we'll hit finish. Alright. So now we can load our tune file. So we'll click Load Tune, come to File, Load Tune, and we can go to our tuning location, which is tuning directory, and here is our file. which is the 94 through 97. So you could select the one for your car that you downloaded. Okay, so now we've loaded our tune file, and since this is brand new, we're going to do, it says bold here that you have to do a power cycle for it to take effect. So we just basically turn off the key, goes offline, turn on the key, comes back, and when it comes back you can see a couple things. One is I'm not touching the throttle, but it thinks I have 2.8% throttle depressed. So that leads us to our next step, is we have to calibrate various sensors, including the throttle position sensor. Alright, so to calibrate, we come up here to Tools, and you'll see a few things. And one thing you may have to do to start off with is unlock calibrations. So right now the calibrations are locked, so they can't accidentally be changed. And we're going to unlock it. And at each time we're going to click Burn. Burn is basically the same as save. And what that means is it's saving it to the Megasquirt controller. So we're going to do that. Close. Come back to Tools. And now you can see these are not grayed out anymore. So the first thing we're going to look at is the throttle position sensor. So right now I'm not touching it, so I'm going to click Get Current. And then I'm going to floor it 100%, Get Current, and accept. And we might want to do that again. It's 0.01. Let's just see what happens if I do it again. Get current. That's the same. Okay. The next step is to, you can check out these. These should be set up. Basically, your map sensor is the MPX4250. That's the component that you soldered onto the Megasquirt, and that'll be in your build notes. So that's fine. We can skip battery voltage. The defaults are fine. And we're going to want to set up our thermistor. Thermistors are the coolant temperature sensor and the air intake temperature sensor. So the coolant one, I'm going to scroll down here. You're not going to select Mazda. If you're in a 94, well, you may if you're in a different car, but if you're in a Miata, you're going to select, which is 90 through 97, you're going to select this one, RX7 CLT. So we select that, right to controller, close, and then we're going to come back in again. Actually, didn't need to close it. Go to air intake temperature sensor, and for this one, if you got the DIY auto-tune kit, it's a GM sensor. So you pick the sensor that you purchased, so GM, and it's got these this table already figured out for you. So you can always put in these values. You can test these values, like say in ice or boiling water, you know, that kind of thing, to get the values that you need. You can measure the resistance. So if you are using something you pulled from a junkyard or something like that, but most people use the GM one, so we got that. And then we're going to calibrate our AFR. So here it's got a list of the common widebands that you may have. AAM, Innovate, etc. In my case, I have 14.7, which is actually already selected. And 14.7 is the people that make the Spartan 2, so that's what I'm using. And just write again, make sure I got that. Okay. And that should be it. So we're now calibrated. All right. So the next thing you're going to want to do is just validate maybe some of the default settings, and all this should be set up already because of your tune file. These are all the defaults, but we're just going to hit a couple of the high points. So number one, you go under basic load settings, and you're going to look at your required fuel. So basically what this does is it's kind of a scalar multiple that affects your fueling table. And so when this is set up correctly, you can set up your fueling table later, and whenever if you do something to change the car, like you get bigger injectors, you can simply go in here and change it. So here I've got stock injectors, the flow is 265 cc per minute, and my required and my air fuel ratio that I'm going to be targeting, is 14.7, and that calculates out to a required fuel of 11.4. So if that's what you have, then this is the number that you're going to want to do. By default, all this stuff should be set up with speed density. It's a 4-stroke engine. Even fire, number of injectors is 4. Our options are MS3X fuel, which is what we want because we just bought an MS3X. And if you have a 94 and above, then you can do fully sequential out of the box. The OEM injectors work with sequential. Otherwise, you may have to do semi-sequential or something like that if you have an earlier car, the 90 through 93. The other thing you would just want to verify is that this is your firing order. The Megasquirt's going to fire in an order of ABCD. So you want the ABCD to match the firing order of your car, which should be 1, 3, 4, 2. So we got all that. We didn't change anything, but we're just going to burn it anyway. And we'll go to the next thing. So in general settings, you want the initial thing to be map reading. And we're going to get into some of these other items when we get to the tuning. For instance, for now, you probably don't have this enabled, incorporate AFR target. So it's set to don't include. We're going to change this to include a little bit later, but we don't need that for now. And the rest of this, the defaults should be good. Alright, so that's basically it for the basic settings. The fuel settings we don't need to mess with. The next part that we need to test for now, before we get it started, is we want to take a look at this. In the ignition options, you're going to want to verify that you're set up for 4G63 is your spark mode. This is the decoder type that's being used to decode the basically synchronization with spark. So what we're going to do here is make sure that the Megasquirt understands what the advance is, and that its advance is matched with the mechanical advance of the car. So for now, we're going to change this to fixed timing, and we're going to put the timing for fixed advance to be 10 degrees. So in the next part of this, which is going to be the initial start of the car, we're going to want to get out our timing light and verify once the car starts that the advance on mechanically with the timing light matches the 10 degrees advance that Megasquirt thinks it has. And if that's not the case, then we're going to want to change it either mechanically by rotating the CAS sensor, or we can actually do it through Megasquirt. So I'm going to close out of this screen, and I'm going to show you what you can have up for the first start. Back under ignition settings, you can turn on the trigger wizard. So when you start the car, the advance is going to be set to, it's going to pop up, since we set it to fixed, it's going to pop up to 10. And so that's probably not going to match what's actually mechanically what the advance is on your car. So what you're going to do is you're going to either decrease or increase this so that it says 10 degrees here and it's actually 10 degrees advanced on the timing light. And so we'll show you how to do that in just a second. Okay, so we got our timing light. If you don't have one, I recommend picking up one. You really need it. You can get them for about 20 bucks or less. And we've got it clipped to our first cylinder. And just around the wire. It's just clipped around the wire there. And then a convenient thing in the Miata is that you have a little blue connector here that has 12 volts power. So you can connect your positive lead to that, and then you can connect your negative lead to a convenient bolt. I stick it on the bolt next to the diagnostic plug. So now we're all set, and we can come back around and try the first start. And so we're already in key on, so we can put the clutch in and try it out. Okay, so then now we come back up here to our trigger wizard. So it's set at 10 because we set it to fixed, and we go take a look at what it really is on the timing light. So our timing light's going off. All right. So hopefully you can see that. Basically, there's a little green mark that I made to make it stand out a little bit farther on my crank wheel, and you can see that it's not advanced enough. It's below it by about 3 ticks. So what we're going to do is decrease the trigger wheel thing on the on Tuner Studio so that that green mark moves up next to the 10. So let's do that. Come back over here. Hit this a couple times, somewhere like that. So you see this went from about 5.5 to 2, and then we'll see what that does. And that's pretty close. I think with the angle that I'm at, it needs to go a little bit more. So I'm gonna hit minus one more time. Let's do 2 more times and see what it does. Yeah, so that's right on the money right there. See if I can get that in the shot. All right, if you can see that. So the green mark is right underneath the 10 there. Okay, so what that means is that now Megasquirt knows what the angle is, and when it advances timing or retards timing, it's going to match mechanically what the engine is doing. So the two are in sync. That's the whole purpose of this little exercise. So we're going to hit burn. And close. Okay. And then I'll come back to the computer mode, and we can continue playing with the idle and tuning. All right, so we've got our car started. We've got the ignition set to our timing. So we're going to go back and turn this to use table. All right. So this sounds actually pretty good, and the idle sounds okay. If I look at my wideband, it's a little bit rich. It's quite a bit rich. So it's reading about 12.9 down here. My throttle, my RPMs is right on target, 850, so that's good. And the default advance looks okay. So what it does is there's like a little bit of advance at idle, and basically everything looks okay. And this, your mileage may vary in your car depending on kind of what's going on with your car, how mechanically sound it is, that type of thing. It may not work perfectly right off the bat. It may be a little rough, and so in the next video we're going to get into some of the details of how to get your car to idle smoothly. So we're going to go through some of the steps, the basic steps. There's like you could write a whole book on just this topic, but the basic steps that you can look for to get your idle to work correctly. Alright, thanks for watching, everybody. Good luck with your build. See you on the next one.